Kyiv orders mass evacuation from frontline regions as Russian troops advance. January 3, 2026. Deus, subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Arya in the latest Deep Dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And that headline we just shared, Kyiv ordering these massive civilian movements, I mean, it just carries this incredible weight. We're talking about life or death decisions for hundreds of thousands of people.
It really is. And it forces us to move past, the maps and the troop movements and ask a really fundamental question about the human side of all this.
Right.
When a government issues an order to evacuate, what actually breaks through the noise, the fear, the sheer inertia of just wanting to stay home?
Yeah.
What makes someone leave everything behind when the risk is right at their doorstep?
And that is our mission today. We're going to cover that critical, deeply human question. We'll be looking at some new research from Ukraine, a controlled experiment that actually tested how effective evacuation messaging is.
Yeah, it's basically rhetoric versus logistics. And the results, well, they could fundamentally reshape how we understand communicating in a crisis.
This deep dive is going to reveal that the deciding factor, it might not be how eloquent the warning is, but how practical the solution is.
And we'll also get into the really severe legal lines drawn by international humanitarian law, or IHL, which, separates a necessary life-saving evacuation from an actual war crime.
Our sources for this are, frankly, powerful. We've got a rigorous survey experiment on over 2,000 Ukrainians. We have reports detailing the humanitarian crisis, official IHL regulations, and of course, recent military assessments that frame just how urgent this all is.
Yeah, including some deeply disturbing reports of Russian advances and associated war crimes. The stakes here are just impossibly high.
Indeed. And the lessons we can draw from all this, they have implications far beyond Ukraine.
For any nation really dealing with sudden, large-scale displacement.
Okay, so to understand why these orders are so necessary right now, let's first look at the reality on the ground. What's the military context heading into 2026?
Well, the current situation is really being dictated by the combat activity. We've seen Russian forces make some notable recent advances.
Where specifically?
We're tracking movements in critical areas, specifically in the Dobropilya and Pokrovsk directions. And these aren't just small adjustments on a map. This is significant pressure. It pushes the front lines closer and closer to these densely populated civilian centers.
So for the local authorities, a mandatory evacuation order isn't a choice. It's a direct response to a military situation that is just, well, falling apart fast.
Exactly. And it's not just the ground war. The threat isn't limited to the front lines.
So you're talking about the long-range strikes.
The whole country is still under constant threat. We're seeing continuous Russian drone and missile attacks, and they're specifically targeting critical infrastructure. This means massive power outages. And these strikes hit population centers far from the trenches, even Kyiv.
So even if you're hundreds of kilometers away from the fighting, your life is still completely upended.
Or worse. This military pressure has created a humanitarian crisis on an almost unbelievable scale. To give you some numbers, as of December 2024, the displacement figures are just staggering.
Cool, hon.
Approximately 3.7 million Ukrainians are internally displaced persons IDPs. These are people forced to flee their homes, but who are still inside Ukraine.
And on top of that, you have, what, almost 7 million outside?
6.9 million refugees outside Ukraine. So you're talking about over 10 million displaced people in total. That's a logistical nightmare. And the numbers aren't static. They go up and down with the fighting.
I remember seeing they peaked at 8 million refugees in Europe back in 2022, then dropped, but now they're back up over 6 million again.
Which leads us directly to the greatest reason authorities order these evacuations, the immediate and severe threat of atrocities. We have reports confirming war crimes committed by Russian forces as they advance into towns. Specific reports mention the execution of Ukrainian POWs in places like Huyaipol.
And the accounts about what's happening to civilians are just horrifying. We've seen these detailed reports from places like Pokrovsk, shooting, torture, killing of civilians. This isn't collateral damage?
No, these are intentional acts. So when local authorities issue a mandatory evacuation, they know what's coming. They know that staying means facing the systematic violence.
Which brings us right back to our core question. If the risks are so obviously existential, why do some people still stay?
That's the million-dollar question. This is where the need for survival meets the Well, the science of human behavior.
Okay, so let's unpack that science. This survey experiment sounds fascinating. It was conducted back in July 2022, right? In places like Kharkiv, Kyiv, Mykolaiv.
That's right. They surveyed 2006 Ukrainians in these highly exposed oblasts. And the key thing to understand, the baseline, is that risk perception was already saturated. 82% of the people they talked to already believed they were at risk of being killed or injured by a missile hitting their home.
So the researchers weren't trying to scare people who were already terrified.
Precisely. They were trying to figure out what was causing the hesitation.
Mm.
They set up the experiment to test two things. Was the hesitation based on preference? People could leave but just chose not to? Or was it based on constraints? People who wanted to leave but just couldn't. They lacked the knowledge of the means.
So they came up with two types of messages to test this. The first one was what they called persuasive nudges.
Right. These were all about influencing that preference-based hesitancy. They used different message frames to try and, nudge people psychologically.
Like what?
Things like a loss of life frame, a gain of life frame, one emphasizing deteriorating living conditions, or even one appealing to military effectiveness.
Yeah.
Pure rhetoric.
Trying to find the magic words. And the second category.
That was completely different. They called it pragmatic information, and it was designed to address the constraint-based problem. It wasn't about why you should flee. It was about how. They just gave people a detailed, actionable plan.
And this is where it gets so critical for anyone involved in crisis communications. Let's start with the surprising part, the null finding, because that changes everything.
It really does. All those clever message framings, all the powerful rhetorical nudges, they had no measurable, statistically significant effect on whether people thought the evacuation message was effective.
Nothing.
Nothing. They failed completely.
That is a bombshell result. In a high-risk war zone, all the usual behavioral science tricks like emphasizing loss, which normally work so well, it just didn't move the needle at all.
Why do you think that persuasive rhetoric failed so badly?
I think it's because the audience was already past that point. If 82% of your population already thinks a missile could hit their house, they don't need you to tell them about the concept of loss of life.
They're living it. They're living it. The messaging was answering a question, is it dangerous? That they already knew the answer to.
So the problem wasn't motivation, it was a massive logistical gap.
Absolutely. And that is what makes the result for the other interventions so important. The simple act of providing a practical, actionable plan, we're talking details on free buses, a specific location to meet, a phone number to confirm, that significantly improved the message's effectiveness.
That's the aha moment right there. And they quantified it, right? The plan increased perceived effectiveness by about, was it 5%?
5%, which might sound modest, but you have to think about the operational reality.
Of course.
When a governor is trying to move hundreds of thousands of people while they're being shelled, that 5% is the margin between success and total catastrophe. It means thousands more people actually get on the bus.
And this idea that people lack the means, not the motivation, that was backed up by their other data too.
It was. When they looked at actual evacuation decisions early in the war, just getting outside help with transportation or information on routes was linked to a huge 8 to 18 percentage point increase in the likelihood that someone actually evacuated. The ability to leave is everything.
So who did this pragmatic approach help the most? Did it work for everyone equally?
That's another fascinating part. The data showed the plan was most effective for the exact group authorities need to reach the most, people who had not evacuated before.
That makes perfect sense. If you've never fled, you don't have a plan, you don't have a network, you don't know the safe routes, the plan is your lifeline.
Whereas people who'd already evacuated before, they'd sort of built up their own knowledge of how to operate in the chaos.
This study also found a pretty clear gender disparity, didn't it?
It did. In the experiment, women responded more positively to the provided plan. And in the real-world data, women were about 15 percentage points more likely to evacuate when offered transportation than men were.
15 percentage points is a big difference. Any idea why? Is it about cultural roles or maybe a greater logistical burden?
It's likely a complex mix of things. In many conflicts, women are often the primary caregivers for children and elderly relatives. They also often have less access to a car or disposable income. So a promise of free, organized transport that removes a massive barrier for someone trying to move an entire family.
And for men, there might be other things at play.
For men, as we'll get to, other factors like the fear of conscription might be a bigger concern than the logistics of the bus itself.
And this all connects back to the real-world problems that displaced people face. Humanitarian reports are constantly highlighting transportation issues, especially right there on the front lines.
Another huge hurdle is documentation. People lose their IDs when they flee, especially from occupied areas, and that creates a major barrier to getting assistance or even temporary housing.
Though it's important to mention the Ukrainian government has been proactive on that.
They have. Ukrainian law is very clear that you can't be denied temporary accommodation or evacuation support
Yeah.
just because you don't have your documents. They're actively trying to mitigate that specific problem.
But the conscription issue is a tough one. It's an unavoidable tension. Officials know that military-age men might avoid registering for help because that same system could identify them for a call-up.
Right, and that really impacts the state's ability to help that part of the population. To cover some of these gaps, the humanitarian system often steps in with direct cash assistance.
How much are we talking about?
It's around 3,600 hryvnia per person per month for 3 months. That's roughly $95.
$95 a month. It doesn't sound like a lot, but in a war zone, that can be a lifesaver.
It really is. And the monitoring shows it's not being used for luxuries. The most common use is food, 76%, and health costs at 67%. It gives people the means to solve their own logistical puzzle, to buy a bus ticket, to get medicine.
So the cash is basically another form of that pragmatic plan. It gives people the resources to act on their decision to leave.
Exactly. It just confirms the experimental finding. People need the means.
All this talk about mandatory evacuations, whether it's with buses or cash, it really forces us to look at the legal framework. Because international humanitarian law, IHL, draws a very, very sharp line between protection and persecution.
This is probably the most important piece of context here for evaluating what the Ukrainian government is doing. Evacuations are heavily regulated. Under Article 58 of Additional Protocol Way, parties to a conflict actually have a duty to evacuate civilians from areas near military objectives. But, and this is the key part, only when it's feasible and safe.
So the duty is there to protect life. But then you have the strict prohibition on forcible transfer and deportation.
Yes. That's codified in Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Unlawful evacuations or forcible transfers. These aren't just policy mistakes. They are grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, and under the Rome Statute, they are considered war crimes.
The legal scrutiny is immense. So forced evacuations are only legally okay under, a couple of very specific conditions.
Extremely restrictive conditions, either for the security of the population itself or for what the law calls imperative military reasons.
And that imperative military reasons phrase, I imagine that has a very high legal bar.
An incredibly high bar. You can't just claim some minor military advantage. It has to be truly essential to the conflict.
Which is why the way Ukraine is handling these evacuations, by facilitating them, by providing the transport and the plans, is so legally important.
It's essential. By doing this, they are fulfilling their IHL duty to protect their citizens. They're ensuring the movement is voluntary, safe, and focused entirely on the security of civilians. And this stands in stark contrast to the reported actions of the opposing forces.
So when we pull all these threads together, what's the big picture? The military pressure is real, the threat of atrocities is acute, and authorities have to order evacuations.
And the key lesson from the science is just unequivocal. Under fire, saving lives is about practical enablement. It's a free bus, the location, the phone number, the $95 in cash. It's the how-to.
The rhetoric about why they should leave is just wasted energy.
It really is. For authorities in Ukraine or any country in a similar crisis, the best way to safeguard their population and meet their legal obligations is through clear, detailed, logistical support that overcomes real-world constraints. We have to shift our focus from psychological campaigns to raw, practical help.
Which leaves us with a final thought. Given this finding that a simple, actionable plan has such a measurable impact, how might international aid and local governments fundamentally shift their spending? I mean, should they prioritize investment in basic logistics, organizing thousands of buses, setting up emergency cash transfers over these complex, expensive psychological campaigns? Especially now that we know the ability to physically leave is the primary factor preventing tragedy. It's a huge budgetary and ethical question for every crisis response team in the world.
It is. It's a compelling thought that really redefines what an effective crisis response should look like.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Fawn off. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.